I'm Neil Wenman, Creative Director of Howes & Wirth. Welcome to Edge of Reason, a limited series podcast produced by Atlantic Rethink, the Atlantic's creative marketing studio, in partnership with Howes & Wirth, a home of visionary, modern and contemporary artists. This season, we begin sitting in on intimate fireside chats between artists, writers, cultural voices at the Ursula Weekender, a gathering of creatives at the Fife Arms in Braemar, Scotland. In this episode, we bring you a conversation between photographer Sir Don McCullin and the director of the Design Museum, Tim Marlow, OBE. The pair discuss the life and career of McCullin, one of the most storied photographers of the late 20th century. Here is Tim Marlow.
As we walked here, I noticed some people taking photographs. It's a beautiful, clear light, but it's the most un-Don McCullin light you could possibly find, isn't it?
You know, I like the idea of things being, English grey, and when I went to the wars around the world, they were often in tropical, like Asia, which is always sunny, and the one great battle I was in Vietnam, it was English weather for the whole 2 weeks of this battle. I couldn't have been more happy.
You've talked a lot about your early career. Was there a moment when you thought, I could do this? Even as a teenager, did you think, I could be a photographer? This is something I could do? Or was it a much slower?
Well, I didn't grow up in the background where I could have be able to afford to buy a camera. And secondly, I wasn't interested anyway. Where I grew up, it was a case of every day was a challenge of survival for me. We've all known fear, and it's been my companion all my life. I've also the fear of failing, the fear of pain, the fear of going to my editor at the Sunday Times, having sent me halfway around the world, and he come back and say I didn't get a story. It's almost unforgivable in the newspaper business. So failure has been my biggest constant kind of dread.
And when do you acknowledge that you are successful? I mean, is that something you realised when you got your first newspaper contract? Was that something you've realised when you had your first museum show? How do you measure the sense of success?
The day I took the gang picture of the boys I grew up with in North London, they were involved in the death of a policeman, and it all took place at the end of my street where I lived in Finsbury Park, North London.
Did you know that was a great picture?
As soon as I took it. When I was a young boy, on the other side of that building, there's quite a distinguished area now. There's a big clothing company, and there's a big cinema opposite, which became the Rainbow Theatre, where lots of pop people used to turn up. So I always thought Finsbury Park was a terrible dump when I lived there, and yet it made me.
This idea, if you knew it was a good photograph when you took it, when you were in the heat of conflict, when you were witnessing human depravity, did you even then have a sense of whether you'd taken a great photograph? Yeah. Or was this always a surprise later when you printed the rolls and then thought, wow?
You instinctively know. I mean, I was blessed with a pair of eyes, quick to kind of compose pictures. I can compose pictures very quickly. I also can see better than other people. I should have been a policeman, really. But I can see before others see. It's a very conceited side of me to say that, but I didn't have a brain, but I had the best pair of eyes in the world. And it's not about eyes, it's about feeling, it's about understanding human behavior. Sometimes you know that human beings are going to do, physically, they're going to do this or that with their bodies. You have to be one step ahead of them. And when I was younger, I was very strong. I could run like a greyhound. I could lift huge amounts of stone. There was a picture earlier of a group of figures which I photographed in a reclamation yard, and I spent all day long lifting these huge lumps of stone, which I couldn't today. I took myself in and photographed it, and when I finished, they all fell over and banged into each other's faces and knocking noses and ears off. And I got this huge bill from the reclamation yard. When you're young, you forge ahead. You don't hesitate. Because of your youth and your spirit, you do not hesitate.
Do you feel you've seen too much? I mean, are there times when you want to close your eyes and you weren't able to do so because you had to bear witness, you had to get these photographs?
My eyes have always been open, actually, strange enough. Even when I sleep, I think they're still open. Some of the things I've witnessed and stood in front of and taken pictures of, I'm never sure I'm a living person when I'm looking at what I'm looking at. Like the murder of Palestinians in shop doorways in Beirut by Christian phalange people wearing the crucifixion or the gold chain. I think, how can this man blow this man's brains out as close as I am to you? And all of his family were coming down the stairs looking, blew their brains all up the wall in front of me. And I had to go around the back of this house and compose myself, because I thought this was the beginning of a day of a great massacre in East Beirut.
How did you compose yourself?
They murdered hundreds of people that day. And I thought, I didn't sign up to this. I thought photography was going to be enjoyable. I thought you press the button. It's nowhere near the truth. I've had an extraordinary life and I managed to get through it. But I've always put my photography first. I've always thought, I suppose, by the way, I'm not an artist. I'm a photographer. I want to get that established.
Why are you so hung up about the idea that you're not an artist? And also, to be fair, you also don't like the idea of being a photojournalist either. A photographer is how you describe yourself. Why would you not want to be seen as an artist? You show in art museums, you show with an art institution like Hauser and Wirth. Why does that matter so much to you?
I studied in my early life when I discovered photography after the gang picture. I thought, I got to get my act together here and find out what this is all about. And I studied a man called Alfred Stieglitz in New York, who was a very, very sophisticated, distinguished kind of man, who was also in the art world as well as photography. But I had to start educating myself. The word photojournalist, I don't go along with that word because I'm not a journalist, I'm just a photographer. So I always felt rather a second rate when I was working with journalists, because they are the guys who write the story. I'm just the illustrator, really. But the worst title that can be put on my shoulder is being called a war photographer, because that really made me seem like a mercenary. And strange enough, there is something mercenary in the way we behaved in the news business. Not just me. The whole television world were quite mercenary. When they burst into a hospital one day in Beirut, where the nurse had to tie the children to the beds because it was being shelled from an offshore gunboat, when the television people came in, they thought they were much more important than stills photographers, and they were treading on the kids and knocking people about with their excitement. They kept saying, "This is prime time, New York." They had no feeling for these people. All they were thinking about, they were their masters in New York on the television scene.
Did you become yourself desensitized to what you were witnessing?
Never. Never in a million years could I not feel the pain of the people that I was photographing. And I didn't really have the right to photograph these people, really. If you think about it, photography is theft. I was one of the greatest thieves in the world. I did not have their consent. And one day a woman beat me in Beirut. She punched the life out of me and I had to take the blows. She came round the corner and she saw a whole block of flats with her family had been kind of turned into a club sandwich. A bomb had completely collapsed it with her family inside. And there were hundreds of people there. I didn't do anything wrong. I just photographed her punching her face and she was beside herself. And I tried to leave the area, and a man with a pistol grabbed my left arm and tried to take my camera. I should have let him have that camera, because that pistol was shaking, pointing at my face. And I managed to get away, and I went back to the hotel, and I ordered a coffee, because I was in such a state, and a man came in and said, Don. Oh, I said, leave me alone. She said, that woman has just been killed. She's just been blown down the road by another car bomb. And so what I'm saying is photographers are nobodies, really. They're just people who can be annoying sometimes. The woman was the only woman or the only human being that ever punched me, because people don't like being intruded upon. They don't like their image stolen without their consent.
Is that why you stopped in the end? Did it get too much? I mean, you did 2-3 decades of some of the most extraordinary witnessing of human conflicts in the history of photography, but were you moving towards a point where you thought, I can't do this anymore?
It was an easy question because I got sacked by the Sunday Times. Mr. Andrew Neil, who's not my favourite human being, he wanted to turn the magazine into a leisure and life magazine. The Sunday Times magazine in the 70s was extraordinary. You know, it was sometimes better than the newspaper. There was an amazing painting one day, which they used on the front of the magazine. It was the Duke of Edinburgh lying next to Scott, the artist. And they were shooting mallards, which were landing in the reeds nearby. And we had such gifted people on the Sunday Times when I worked there. And then one day, Neil took a dislike to me, and I never did anything wrong. And he said, I'm not having you criticize this newspaper and taking the money. Well, the money wasn't extraordinary when I risked my life every month to go to a war. So I walked out of the building, and possibly I never went to the war in Bosnia and all those, which was very dangerous. So maybe Andrew Neil gave me a life, really.
Yes, saved your life.
Saved my life, really.
So once you'd stopped, was it easy to see images of conflict and not want to be there? I mean, do you want to do it now? Do you want to be in the Ukraine? Do you want to be in Gaza?
I do, but not with these legs. Too old. And the truth is, yes, I have a passion for that. I mean, I used to my father used to sometimes lose the family wages. He would go to Haringey and throw, he was a gambler.
Yeah.
He gambled on greyhound racing. And I've always boasted that I've never gambled, because the irony is I've gambled with the greatest stakes in the world my life. Yeah. But I used to love running across those battlefields. It had nothing to do with photography. It was total kind of nonsense, macho me. And I always thought that while I was running across those battlefields, I was putting my fingers up as well. But I was a silly young man. And men are silly when they're young. They have the terrible thought, terrible direction, or lack of. Then I had to bring myself back to reality. So when I got pushed out of the Sunday Times, I was so depressed with not, exercising I would get in my car and go to Bradford or go to Liverpool, which were really downtrodden cities in England, and photograph the social wars. Because people used to write to me from prison sometimes, and I've got a letter I cherish at home, and a man wrote to me and said, Don, your editor ought to be sacked because I didn't think some of your pictures were in focus. And I've kept that letter, and I would get letters from soldiers and people saying I want to be a war photographer, and I said, you can be. There are lots of social wars in our country. And I would go, Bradford, for me, I could go there blindfolded and come away with amazing images. And some of those Dickensian Victorian cities are there still today. And, you could go, but no newspaper wants to publish this kind of imagery. They want uplifting. You don't see many war pictures anymore. You could say, thankfully.
What interests me is how systematic it is possible to perceive your career as. In the last decade or so, you've constructed still life imagery to photograph, and landscape is something that you've done extraordinarily for the last 3 decades. Looking back on it, do you think you have been quite systematic? Did you think, well, I've actually, portrait is one thing. Now I want to look at something completely different, landscape, I'm immersed in it, and then still life is the thing I haven't yet done?
I have to admit it, I've been a bit of an old tart in my life. I think, why not try everything? And it's up to you to stand on the hillsides. And I do it around Somerset, because where I live, it's part of the Arthurian legend, or the myth of Arthurian story. And I stand on those hills, and I go home, and I don't have a picture, because it didn't work. But I don't go home angry. I go home fulfilled, thinking, what a lucky man you are. You don't work in an office doing this all day long. You don't have to struggle to get on the underground and go home. I've been a very incredibly roaming. kind of single person.
So when you go out into the Somerset landscape near your home, there are days when you don't take a photograph. So you're not snapping, or you're not taking photographs randomly and see what comes up. You're waiting for what?
The sky.
The sky.
Without a sky, you don't have a landscape. And when you mentioned earlier about the still life, I had a passion for the Dutch painters. Where I lived in Somerset, I inherited this completely dilapidated house 40 years ago, and there was an old outdoor loo, and it had a piece of plastic which had never been cleaned. And I thought the light coming through that plastic was, I called it 100-year light, and I started creating those still lifes. And I would go around the hedgerows and pick sloe berries, horse mushrooms I would find, and I have a very nice collection of oriental bronze Buddhas, and I would marry them. And then one day someone said to me, do you realize they look like altars, religious altars? And it didn't dawn on me, and it wasn't intentional, but I was in a wonderful creative spirit, even though I'd been kicked out of the Sunday Times. Then I realized that war is not everything. There are other aspects of creative life. By the way, this is one of my favorite pictures, because it's a war situation in Vietnam, but I think in a way it's got another message to it. And so I hate this picture. Sometimes some of your pictures get used, they're kind of slightly iconic, and then they start becoming meanest. They don't have a...
You hate that picture because it
gets used too much. Yeah. People say, oh, I love that picture. I like this picture of the Bogside in Ireland. There's a Sunday, and as soon as the pubs at 3 o'clock emptied, you knew the riots would start. You could judge it by your clock. And this is Beirut, by the way, in the... so I knew all these boring pictures.
But it's like a racing commentary. We should just speed them up, and you can go. But I'm going to go back, because your description of making a still life sounds suspiciously like the practice of an artist. But anyway, we'll let that lie.
Yeah, I know it's playing with fire a bit, really. But I had nothing else to do. I was out of work. Before you asked me the question, I'm going to make the question. Sorry to say this, but I found myself in Algeria many years ago with Bruce Chatwin. And when Chatwin died, I suddenly remember this occasion where he and we were in a little Roman town. And I thought, I'm going to do something about the Romans. And this is 20-odd years ago now. And I went into Jonathan Capes, my publishers, and I said, I'd like to do this. And you could see the boredom on their faces right away. They thought, let's give him a cup of coffee and kick him out and get rid of him. And with the aid of my wife, Catherine, who was in the travel business, got me the odd flight, got me hotel rooms. I did this on a non-budget, a book. It was called Across the Roman Empire. And it was all the Roman cities in North Africa. And I fell in love with the Roman world then. But they were not good people either.
No, once again, you're drawn to violence and conflict. Yeah. The process of printing your work is very distinctive. There is a McCullin style that comes across your work. This kind of darkness, this contrast. Where do you think that comes from? I mean, did you always have that sense of wanting to have the contrast of foreboding, gloom in the work?
I blame Richard Wagner. Because I like the sky. I call my skies Wagnerian skies. They're metallic skies. A lot of people say to me, those pictures of your landscapes, they look like battle landscapes. I have a house full of 10,000 images and a mine with 20,000 images. I'm constantly thinking, assessing, thinking I'm going to do this before I die, which is going to be very soon. So I'm going to shut my darkroom, but I want to print one last lot of things, as I spoke earlier.
Why are you so... I mean, Don, you're 91 in October. Cartier-Bresson, 95. Oscar Niemeyer, the great architect, was still working when he was 102. We're expecting at least another decade. But why this sense that it's coming to an end for you? You feel it, I've heard you talk about it much more pronouncedly in the last year or so.
You say to yourself, I'm going to do this, and your body taps you on the shoulder and says, not at this age, you're not. You're not going to... I'm sick of getting on airplanes. I'm sick of the bullying at airports, and I don't have much voice left anymore photographically. I've done everything. I've done war, I've done landscape, I've done all kinds of things. I've worked on a few films for my sins, which have always been unrewarding, apart from the check at the end of the day. But the truth is, I'm just like another man, really. I've done everything that other people do. I've been in slightly a bit more privileged place. And I remember one day, I think we saw a picture of a man walking to a steel foundry in West Hartlepool, and it was in 1963. It was the day it was the week one of my sons was born, my first child. And I slept in my car, and I bought a custard tart and a bottle of Tizer. And when I woke up in the morning on the back seat with no feeling in my legs, my custard tart was like a hand grenade. And I couldn't drink because everything was frozen. And I saw that scene of the chimneys, and I thought, I've read about this scene. This is Auschwitz. You know, I have a mind that can go in all kinds of different directions. And I thought, I'm looking at Birkenau of the extension of the Auschwitz concentration world, and I need a man, I need a person. And sure enough, this man came round, huddled going towards the steel foundry. I took that one picture, and I drove 600 miles going all the way from where I lived back to get that one picture, and I only used half a roll of film. And I remember driving back to London, and I was so tired because I'd crashed into a bus on the way back. And I remember winding the window down when I should have stopped and stuck my head out to keep me awake. I was so excited about that one picture. I knew right away it was an iconic picture. I don't have that feeling anymore. It's gone now. I'm looking forward to not decay, but I'm looking forward to freedom.
Well, you've spent, in the last 3 or 4 years, there's been quite a few exhibitions. I mean, one at Hauser in Somerset, one at Tate Britain, surveying your career. Do you surprise yourself when you look at your work? Do they contain surprises when you revisit them, or do you know them so well there's nothing that surprises you anymore? Because your memory is unbelievable. I mean, your sense of recollection.
For an old bloke, you mean?
No, just for a human. It's just for a human being.
I did a book once, and it was called Sleeping with Ghosts. It was published by Jonathan Capes. I've got 80,000 negatives and 20,000 colour transparent and thousands of prints. I know when I go to bed at night, that print room and my dark room, there are merry kind of ghosts in that room. I've inflicted and poisoned that house with these images. And I'm going to, when I leave this world, my wife, Catherine, will have to care for that and get rid of that archive out of that house. That house is poisoned. I've achieved what I set out to be once I knew I'd fallen in love with photography. And photography has punished me for that love affair. You know, I've broken arms, I've had shells in my legs, and I've had malaria that kills you and stuff, and I'm determined to stay alive and do more photography. But now I've got to the stage now where I'm coming down the side of the mountain to rest.
You're still talking about the next book. So do you think it's going to be possible for you not to work?
I think photography is on the slippery slope, actually. You don't see the kind of photography that we used to practice, myself and other photographers, anymore. You don't see it.
Well, is that because of mobile phones? Is that because of the digital revolution?
That's a very, very good point. You know, people with mobile phones get on my nerves because if I'm coming out of Paddington Station, I'm always bumping into some silly fool who's checking his phone out. And everyone is a photographer now, but nobody ever gets around to printing those bloody pictures. I know somebody who's got 80,000 images on their mobile phone, and a lot of people are like that. So none of that disturbs me. I think every dog has its day. Photography is really a hard life. You know, your body has to, you know, you sleep in ditches, and I slept next to a dead body once. In Vietnam, but there was a partition wall, and I always went one way, and then one day I thought I'd go the other way, and there was a dead North Vietnamese soldier lying with his eyes open, and he had raindrops in his eyes. His eyes were filled with rain, not tears. And it's the sensitive things like that that I understand. I interpret things that other people wouldn't even go there.
Do you have regrets?
Sorry?
Do you have regrets?
No, I don't. But Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't have been wonderful if I'd have been born a doctor instead. I know the way out of this conversation. I'd like to repent and feel that I've given life, not being the witness of life being stolen from people. But one day, one last story, I found a man one day after a village battle, and me and another man, he had a big 4x4, and we were leaving. I said, why don't we take the wounded of this village with us? So we crammed his 4x4, and then a man ran and said, there's one more man. I said to him, okay, I'll go and get him. So I went down this alleyway, this was in Salvador, and I heard a terrible moaning noise, and I said, where is this man? They said, here on the floor. And they rolled him over, and he had no face from his nostrils down to his throat. He was a young man, and we got him, they found a wicker chair, and they carried him to the road, and he was lying, sitting in the chair with no face from here, and swarms of flies descended upon this wound. And I saw a woman, and I said, in English, because you don't realize you're in a foreign country, can I scarf on her head? And I put the scarf over this man's face so the flies would stop enjoying themselves. And I walked this man back to the car, and a week later I got injured myself, and I said to the doctor in the same hotel, I brought the man, how is he? He said, he's fine. And I thought, how can you say a young man with no face is fine? And so these moments are forever locked into my memory, and they sometimes invite themselves, as I'm doing now. What's this got to do with photography? I could take the damage because I was stealing other people's pain. So I don't have any regrets, but I have certain feelings of uncomfortableness that I should have, really.
Did you ever have therapy, Don? Did you have to do therapy after you stopped?
Yeah, I did. It was the Somerset landscapes.
Yeah.
That was my therapy. Standing on those hills and watching the skies, and sometimes the skies would defeat me and I'd go home with nothing. But you know, people who sit on riverbanks fishing, they don't catch any fish. They go home, they've had a great day. They never worry about not catching a fish. It was the same with me, the same philosophy. And it was cleansing my anger inside.
Have you got your camera with you on this trip?
No, the great joy for me is, you know, walking through London Airport or any airport without a camera. And I've been recently working in the Vatican, and I took a selection of cameras, and the very one I depended upon malfunctioned and wouldn't work. So I've got to go back to the Vatican and do it again. But I don't have any complaints about the way life has treated me.
You're much admired, Don.
Well, I don't deserve it in a way, because I come back to the original theft, you see. I feel uncomfortable about the laurels do not sit well on my head.
Well, I think I can speak for all of us when I say we're delighted that you've been such a prolific and accomplished thief. It's an amazing career, and we wish you peace, Don.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I'm Neil Wemman. On the next episode of Edge of Reason, Houseworth artist Lorna Simpson joins Randy Kennedy, editor-in-chief of Ursula magazine. If you like what you've just heard, help spread the word about our series to other listeners like you. Thank you for listening.